Hi, how are you? Merry Christmas. Thanks. Whether you're someone that worships with us regularly or this is your first experience with Narrate, welcome. We're thrilled and honored and don't take lightly that you chose to celebrate the birth of Jesus with us. And for those of you that are in from out of town, how many of you are from out of town? Oh, yeah, look at that. There's not very many of you. Welcome. That's because everyone in Helena leaves. Right? Like that's the predominant pattern. Welcome to Helena. Welcome to Narrate. We're a community that really centers ourselves around this idea of gathering and scattering. It's kind of the way we think about Jesus and the gospel, about who God is. And so we value this. We like to gather. We work hard on gathering. We think it's valuable for myriad reasons, I suppose, in the opportunity it affords us to ask questions, to wonder about who Jesus really is and what his dreams for the world really are, in the way that it invites us to tell story and meet people and meet some people that we want to talk to for 2 seconds every Sunday and some that we'd like to spend more time with during the week. It kind of goes both ways. We like it for the relational connection. And I guess the other part of that is we evaluate it on its ability to propel us into the other 6 days, because we're convinced that the real work of following Jesus and believing in Jesus is those other 6 days and the opportunity to put a towel over our arm and matter and serve others. Hence the diapers. Did you see the mountain of diapers out there? Very cool. Here's the story behind that, because some of you are weirded out, perhaps rightly so. Last year it hit us that, man, if a bunch of people are going to gather and worship the birth of Jesus, who was himself born to peasant parents, it might be appropriate for that gathering to have tangible benefits to the poor, to the under-resourced. And so last year we did socks, and that was fun. And then this year we had this idea presented to us of that there's this organization in town that has kind of built this whole infrastructure to distribute diapers to single moms and under-resourced families, and they don't have any diapers. So we went like, well, that's kind of what the church is for. So there you have it. I hope you had your picture taken. I hope you inundate Facebook with your picture. I've been told before the service, someone said we should auction off the cutout of Lenny. So Jenny's down for $100. So you just let me know after the service if you'd like to beat her. And I don't know, like James might need to talk to her why she wants Lenny's cardboard cutout. That could be a problem. Anyway. Okay, so you ever feel like you're too busy to win? Like to win at life? You ever feel like you're just too darn busy to be the person that you feel like God has called you to be? I know that's kind of easy pickings, right, on Christmas Eve. It's like, wow, gee, I mean, that's all of us, right? Will you just kind of come with me for about 20 minutes? Because where I want to provoke you to think a little bit is on that issue of busyness. Like, you ever feel like you're too busy to win at marriage? Dumb question, right? Like, I mean, it'd be one thing if it was just you and your wife and you didn't have a job. It'd be another thing if he wasn't a Bronco fan. I mean, there's all these things that kind of collaborate on the difficulty of marriage, right? And you ever just feel like you don't have enough time? Like you're just too busy to win at that? Or how about raising kids? I mean, wouldn't it be one thing if, the only goal was to keep them warm and well fed? You ever feel too busy to actually have the conversations that you'd like to have with them? Like to be as intentional about unpacking their day and their friendships and their decisions as you'd like to be? Or how about spiritually? Ever kind of get stuck in your own guilt of just the busyness that comes with how hard it is to find the time to invest in your relationship with the Lord like you'd like to invest in your relationship with the Lord? Or financially? I mean, it's one thing to have a budget, right? You ever feel too busy to use it? This is kind of one of the ironies of getting old is we work more and we make more money, and yet we have less time to organize and manage the money that we do have. You ever just feel too busy to win financially? Maybe you're a student. And the catch-22 of being a student is, you have to get good grades to get into college, and yet to get into college you also have to have money, unless you want to be up to your eyeballs in debt when you're done, and so you kind of have to study hard, but you also have to get a job, and I mean, you ever just feel too busy to win at both of those? How about physically? I mean, who here doesn't realize that they need to work out? That would be nobody, right? That's not really the issue. It's the issue of like what goes, or eating well. Well, we all know that we could eat better. We all know that fruits and vegetables are a better alternative than McDonald's. The problem is the McDonald's drive-thru takes 2 seconds on a good day, right? You ever just feel too busy to win? Like, do you remember when you had time? Remember that? When you were in high school, maybe, or when you were in junior high, when you weren't married, when you didn't have kids, when you didn't have 2 kids, when you didn't have 3 kids. Don't recommend moving beyond 3, right? Though some of you have done it. Do you remember when you had time, like to have a glass of wine with your wife after the kids went to bed, to read a book, to learn a new hobby, to perfect a hobby, to refinish a car, or maybe perfect your skill on the guitar? Do you remember when you would buy an album and you could just like put the 8-track in the player and lounge out on your couch and nothing else entered your mind. You could just listen to the latest, I don't know who we talking to, Beatles? Johnny Cash? I don't know. Remember when you could just listen to an album? Do you remember when you had time to just think, to daydream, to sit on the couch with a glass of coffee and just pray to the Lord kind of in the silence of your heart? I had this interaction with my oldest a couple weeks ago. We were sitting there watching football. I think it was college football, so maybe it was a few weeks ago now. And I don't know why, but he told me that it must have been like a bad tackle or something. And he said, Dad, did you know that your ear is only attached by skin? And this is kind of what I do. I learn and I share and I inspire. And so I went, oh, yeah, that's interesting, and logged it into my brain without much of a premeditated desire. But the next day, the opportunity presented itself to share that information. We were watching football with a bunch of friends, and I said, hey, guys, did you know that your ear is only connected to your head by skin? And there was this like, oh, really? And then my wife, who's an RN and a consummate question asker, I think it comes with the territory, said, where did you learn that? I just bailed. I went, Lincoln told me that. That's where I learned that. She said, Lincoln, where did you hear that? I'm thinking second grade, right? Like second grade, you're learning all kinds of weird information. Like, so that's kind of the benefit that I gave him. He said, well, I was just like pulling on my ear the other night. Remember when you had time to just think? To pontificate, to just kind of make up theories, even if they weren't good ones? Right, it was before you started that business, before you went back to school, before you got that job, before you got the second job, before you got married, before your kids had their own activities. Because like I used to think carrying them around in a carrier was work. What I'm learning is, well, no, eventually they get their own lives. Who knew? I didn't bargain for that. I mean, remember when you had time, like before your kids were on every sports team, before you had all that stuff to do, maybe before they got sick or you got sick? Remember when you had time? I mean, you could do stuff. Now, here's kind of where we arrive at, I think, the great irony of Christmas Eve, and it's been well documented, so I assure you that it's kind of not where we're going to dwell. But right, like this is what we talk about every Christmas Eve, is the irony of the fact that this is this high spiritual time where we celebrate the fact that God sent his son. And it's this time where we try to get really intentional with the Lord, and yet if we're honest, the reality is that for many of us, this is our least spiritual time of the year. Because we're so busy, right? And I just want to tell you, here's the anti-goal. What I don't want to do is turn on those big spotlights and just shine a big light of shame and guilt on the fact that we're too busy to love the Lord enough. In fact, kind of quite the opposite, because around Narrate, what we've been working through in this month of December is this idea of the series that we called Prepared, and really the question we were asking was, like, is authentic transformation really possible, or is that just Christian rhetoric? Like, can Jesus really change us into different kinds of people? And this thesis that we've kind of developed, I include you in that because I have the microphone, was this idea that like authentic transformation really is possible if we'll align our lives with those practices that Jesus participated in to receive life and power from the Father. And kind of the way we've been thinking about it is that in Jesus' life, he lived a marvelous life, the best life ever lived. And yet what we can lose sight of is he did these things behind the scenes that infused him with strength, infused him with life and power from the Father. And as I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking about this idea of solitude, here's what hit me. Like when it comes to being busy, Jesus was busier than any of us. Like who wants to get in a match with Jesus on a like, I'm busier than you are? Like I'm in higher demand than you are. Like who wants to go there? I don't know, the president maybe? I mean, Jesus, he was so busy that at one point there was this mob of people that followed him, and they were so infatuated and hung on every word he said so much that they followed him long enough that they started to get hungry, and Jesus had this like, oh man, if I send them home now, they're all going to drop like flies. Like, you know you're busy if people hang on your words so much that they forget they're supposed to eat. That's busy. That's in high demand. He was so busy. At one point, he was in this large mob of people, and there was this gal, and she had this bleeding problem, and she'd spent all of her money on doctors, and they couldn't heal her. And she knew the Jewish scriptures, and she knew that the Jewish scriptures said that when the Messiah comes, when the Savior comes, there will be healing in his wings. Now, what we think is that those wings, and what we think she thought is that those wings, that word wings referred to the tassels on their prayer shawl. See, at this time, Jewish men didn't just pull out their prayer shawl when they wanted to pray. It was like an undershirt that they wore. Sometimes you'll see this when you're watching the news, and you'll see tassels in the front and the back. And what we think she thought was, if I just touch his tassel, if he's really the Messiah, I'll be healed. And being a woman who did believe that he was the Messiah, she did this thing. She just kind of snuck up to him in the crowd because he's busy. And she wanted to bug him. And she thought, well, if I can just like get up behind him in the crowd and anonymously like touch his tassel, I'll be healed. Which is pretty creepy, right? I mean, you know you're busy if people are just kind of anonymously coming up and touching you. He was so busy that at one point he was healing people, and the place was just jammed, like no elbow room anywhere, and it was like 110 degrees. Well, that's kind of theorizing, but it's Israel after all. And the place is jammed full of people, and these guys have a buddy, and he's paralyzed, and they think, like, if we could just get this guy in front of the Messiah, he'll be healed. But we don't have any options. And so they climbed up on the roof, a parchment roof for sure, and just kind of dug a hole and lowered him down in front of him. Guys, you know you're busy if your wife rappels into your office, right? This guy was busy. He was so busy. There was this guy, Bartimaeus. And there was lots of guys like this on the side of the road. And he was so busy that Bartimaeus, he knew that he could heal him, but he knew he didn't have a shot at getting his attention. And he just stood on the side of the road and said, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the crowd with him went like, shut up, he's busy. And I just kind of wondered if part of what Bartimaeus was thinking, like, well, he doesn't have to come over and talk to me. All he's got to do is kind of go like, heal that guy, Lord. And Jesus actually found time for him. He was so busy that in another case, this soldier came to him and was like, dude, my daughter, is it daughter or son? I don't know, just talk fast and people won't know that I don't know if it's daughter or son. But this Roman dude came to him and was like, daughter or son, someone's sick. Will you heal him? And Jesus was like, let's go. And the guy's like, no, you're too busy. You don't have to go. Just say the word and he'll be healed. The guy was crazy busy. Do you know you're busy if when you walk from your car or your mom's car to the school or your car to the office, if people are up in the trees just to get a glimpse of you? And yet that's what happened to Jesus, right? I mean, Zacchaeus, he had lots of things going against him. He was a wee little man. He was a tax collector. But he climbed trees to just see Jesus as he walked by. Ever notice when you read about Jesus eating a meal, especially if it's a meal with scribes and Pharisees, that the meal itself was always surrounded by more people? Again, kind of creepy. And kind of cultural, because what went on in that culture was when the big dogs had dinner and they were talking theology and they were talking God and they were talking kingdom, it was somewhat normal that the surrounding community could kind of, around the periphery, just kind of stand there and listen in. In fact, one gal, remember, she stood there and listened in and cried. And they could just listen in on the conversation. I mean, could we agree that you're pretty busy if the next time you're at the brew house having dinner, there's like 30 people just kind of standing around your table, just kind of listening in, just kind of glean a nugget. So here's my point. Jesus was busy, and yet I think we would all agree that Jesus won, that he fulfilled God's purposes for his life, that he was the exact person God called him to be, even to the point of death on the cross. Jesus was busy, and yet he won. Which leads me to this question: what if Jesus won despite his busyness? See, around Christianity, we're prone to talk about, don't be too busy, don't be too busy, don't be too busy. Not the story I see in Jesus' life. Like what if he won despite his busyness? In other words, what if Jesus didn't flit about, la, 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 like this is kind of the way we picture Jesus, right? Like he just floated around like some Eastern spiritual person and nothing stressed him out, and he talked really slow and monotone, and his feet didn't really touch the ground because he was kind of part angel, and he just kind of, nothing stresses me out. I mean, he's like a guy on too many meds, right? It's the way we tend to picture him. What if that's not true? What if he was busy? And we've kind of agreed, or at least I've agreed in my own head, which means I'm going to go forward and say that you've agreed with me, that he was busy. And yet he won, which I think raises this question: why could he win despite his busyness? And if we were to take a poll, we would all go like, biggest reason why I don't win at marriage, raising kids, just kind of rattle down the list is because I'm too busy. And here's where I think it gets tricky, and here's where I think Christmas becomes really relevant. Because if we're not careful, we play this card. Like in Uno, it's the equivalent of the one with all 4 colors and the +4, so like you get to play, and the guy next to you gets hosed, right? Here's the card that we play. We go, well, he was God. He was God. That's why he won despite his busyness. And you know what the early church would say? They would say, that's heresy. It's one of the most foundational things they held on to. Not that he was God, that's not heresy, but that he was God and human. And they embraced that, and they fought for that, and they demanded that what we believe and understand about Jesus is he was fully God and fully human. Let's check this out. In Matthew, it says, this is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, because you'll save the people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Do you have the song in your head? Bad joke. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and he took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son. And he gave him the name Jesus. Right? Like here's why we're here, right? Because he was God and he was human. And we ask this question, why did he win despite his busyness? And we play the busy card and we miss it. We miss, because here's what I think is easy to do, is to go like, well, he was a can't-miss talent. I was reading an article this morning, sorry to mention the Broncos, in the Denver Post about Von Miller, a guy who was the number 2 pick in the draft. And the article's title was, 2 can't-miss talents. And I thought that is such a grave injustice to those guys that were drafted 2 and 3. It assumes that they were going to win. And I think that's what we do with Jesus. And the early authors of the Scripture and God himself went like, no, he was human. Watch what Hebrews says. It's obvious, of course, that he didn't go to all this trouble for angels. It was possible. It was for people like us, children of Abraham. That's why he had to enter into every detail of human life. Then when he came before God as high priest to get rid of the people's sins, he would have already experienced it all himself, all the pain, all the testing, and would be able to help where help was needed. Now that we know, in Hebrews 4, there's another one. Now that we know what we have in Jesus, this great high priest with ready access to God, let's not let it slip through our fingers. We don't have a priest who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through the weakness and testing, experienced it all but the sin. So let's walk right up to him and get what he is so ready to give. Take the mercy, accept the help. See, we're prone to go like, well, he was God, and the Scriptures go like, no. I think in Christmas we're even more prone to do this because we get caught up in all the drama, right? The magi, the shepherds, the star, the voices from heaven, all the craziness, the virgin birth. And here's what I think we miss. We miss that despite the incredibly dramatic circumstances that I'm not convinced were as dramatic when they happened as they are when we read them, but despite all of that, despite those 3 years that Jesus lived so marvelously, after his birth, shortly thereafter, he disappeared into complete obscurity for the better part of 30 years. And we go, yeah, but he showed up at the temple when he was 12 and asked these profound questions. Yeah, but and after that, he went and spent 18 years in total obscurity, working as a tecton. We think of it as carpenter. There was no wood to work with. He was a stonemason, most likely. And I wonder if in those 30 years, Jesus learned that if you're going to win publicly, you got to win privately. That if you're going to win when the lights are on, if you're going to win despite the busyness, you've got to develop the ability to win, when it's not so busy. You've got to develop the ability to be busy and rest. And here's where I think that might be what was going on partially in those 30 years. Because we've already established Jesus was busy. And yet, the apostles, the writers of the Gospels, they were all pretty passionate about capturing this dynamic in Jesus' life. Luke, I think, does it best. Watch this. At daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving then. So there's this pattern of solitude. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. In Luke 9, we see him now teaching his disciples. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. In Luke 9, about 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. And even at the very end, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, which, by the way, wasn't an amusement park, it was a cornfield. It was where he went to get alone. The text tells us this. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. As his disciples followed him, on reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed. He was alone. "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Here's my question. What if Jesus won despite the busyness because Jesus knew the value of solitude? What if Jesus won despite the busyness because he knew the value of solitude? Not to be confused with that game on your computer that you play when you're getting paid $15 an hour and you're supposed to be doing something else. Not solitaire. What if he knew the value of solitude? In fact, I wonder if Jesus knew then what science and medicine have taught us some 2,000 years later. Jack Grapple, ever heard of him? Around Narrate, we'll talk, somewhat, mostly in my head, we'll talk about grapple breaks. Jack Grapple was a guy who was a doctor, and he developed this team of physicians around him, and nutritionists, and crazy smart science, medicine people, and he developed quite the reputation for working with the world's best athletes. We're talking like people who won the gold medal, and they said, next year I don't want to just win the gold medal, I want to break the world record, or 4 years later. He worked with people who went like, I don't want to just make like the Final Four at Wimbledon, I want to win Wimbledon. He was working with the world's best athletes, and really what he was doing, here's his question. What if the only thing that inhibits your performance is your God-given ability? And his passion was to so understand the human body and how we work within chemically and all those different things that the only thing that would limit an athlete was their God-given skill. And he says, as a result of all of this research, and now he wrote a book called Corporate Athlete, and they work with police officers and the FBI and the Army, all these different people going like, how to maximize your skill. He says, here's the biggest thing people misunderstand. They misunderstand stress. They think stress is a bad thing, when in fact, he says, you can't grow without stress. And yet, here's the catch. You don't grow during the stress. When do you grow? During the rest. Think of it like lifting weights. When you go to the gym and you're lifting dumbbells, something you can tell I do quite regularly, what are you doing to your muscle? You're stressing your muscle. Does your muscle grow while you're lifting the dumbbell? No. When does it grow? The next day when you're not. And what do we know if you lift the dumbbell too much, day after day after day after day? You actually do more harm than good, right? And yet the converse is also true. What do we know if you never lift the dumbbell? Too much rest. You'll kill your muscles. So you'll kill them if you lift them too much, and you'll kill them if you don't lift them at all. That's what he says we have to understand about busyness, about stress, is we need stress. It's when we grow. Busyness isn't the problem. It's the lack of recovery, he would say, is the problem. In fact, he just notes that everything in your body, it does this. It happens in waves. It goes up and it goes down. We like to think flatline. Stuff doesn't do that. He says your sleep patterns. You don't do this. You do this, right? That's why you get grumpy when you get woke up at certain times. Your glucose, it doesn't do this. It does this. What does an EKG chart look like when you see it on the TV? Is that heartbeat? EKG, I'm not a medical person. I've got it written on my hand. There's EEG, that's your brain, waves. There's EMG, that's your muscles, waves. It doesn't happen like this. He would say, what we've got to do is we've got to learn to recover. Busyness isn't the problem. It's recovery that's the issue. I brought with me one of my most prized possessions, but if I show you, you might never like me again. Can you handle this? You might never think the same of me again. I'm a plant nerd. I always say that my grandpa job will not be the Walmart greeter. It'll be in a really cool greenhouse somewhere. Maybe. Now, I'm going to create a little contrast. You know what the difference is between this and this? Besides a lot of years, some years. You know what the difference is between this and this? Do you want to know? Are you sure? Because when I tell you, you're never going to come back to Narrate. You're going to think I'm the biggest nerd on the planet. You sure you want to know? Okay, I might ruin it for you. You know what the difference is between this and this? I sing to this one 10 minutes every day. I'm totally kidding. I do not sing to anything. Here's the difference, though, and it's just as nerdy. This sits on my desk at home. It sits where I can see it when I practice my own solitude, and I'm kind of pretty hyper vigilant about that. Like I'm a better person if I get that time. And sometimes it's a book, and sometimes it's a Bible, and I don't really want to get into that. But it sits where I can see it. And sometimes I get distracted, and it's not like Mr. Miyagi. Like it's not this spiritual thing for me. But I'll get distracted, and I'll just like stare at the bonsai tree. And I'm not kidding. I can stare at the thing for a long time. I've stared at it for a whole hour. Like I was supposed to read my Bible, and I just like geeking out on my bonsai tree. I told you, Dan, you're never going to think the same of me again, dude. It's over. But here's the deal. You know what the result of that is? I'll go, oh man, I think I'm going to wire, you can't see it, but there's a wire on these two branches. I think I'm going to wire these two branches together. And there used to be a stick that made this one kind of do this, and I think I want it to kind of do that, and I'm going to wire this stick to it, and then I'll go like, after staring at it for 20 minutes, I'll go like, oh, I think I'll pick that leaf off right there, because you'll notice like on the bottom side, there's not supposed to be leaves, only on the top side. Oh, there's one on the bottom. Isn't that what solitude's about? Isn't it easy to imagine that, well, you don't even have to imagine, you can read about it in the text, where you get alone with God and you're in silence and God goes, hey, let's talk about that conversation that you had. Hey, let's think about that verse that you read. Hey, let's think about tomorrow. Let's think about the way that you're processing that part of life. I mean, isn't that the thing that solitude with the Lord, recovery, whatever you want to call it, isn't that what it affords us and nothing else in life does? Is it gives us this time where we come before God's pruning hand, if you will. And he can shape us, and he can form us, and he can correct us, and he can encourage us, and he can tell us story, and he can change our values in ways that no sermon and no song and nothing else can, because it's there where we're just kind of with the Lord, and he just goes like, let's just work on this. I was in Israel several years ago, and of course there's olive trees everywhere in Israel. And there's black olives and there's green olives. Did you know that's the same olive tree? Didn't know that. Black ones are just more rotten. But in Israel, there's olive groves, and at the olive grove, there's these big plump olives. And then there's also this olive trees. They actually look a lot like our Russian olive trees, minus the giant 10-foot thorn that are just kind of in the landscaping everywhere. And you know the seeds on a Russian olive tree? Are you with me on that? Like it's just a seed. Like there's not really a fruit. And I've always wondered, like, why do we call it Russian olive? It's just a seed. And I asked our guide in Israel one time, what's the deal? How come there's some that grow this fruit, these olives, and then there's these other ones like I'm, I don't know, hanging out somewhere in Israel, and you pull them and you're hoping to see an olive, and you just get a pit. Different species? What's the deal? He said, no, actually, they're the exact same tree. The difference, he said, is wild olive trees will never bear fruit. Plant an olive seed, let it grow, don't ever touch it. It'll never give you anything other than a pit. For an olive tree to bear fruit, what's it take? It takes a pruner. It takes someone who understands the tree and understands how to manipulate the tree and work the tree and shape the tree, however it is you want to think about that, in such a way that it bears fruit. I guess my question to you is, what if, and I hope you find this refreshing, what if your busyness isn't the problem? Because Jesus was probably busier than you are. What if the real issue is recovery and learning that God is a God who calls you not just to watch TV, let's not confuse recovery with that, but who invites you to step into his sacred space and just go like, hey, let's talk about that. Now, for some of you, this is review and really serves the purpose of kind of motivation. And for others, this idea of solitude and quiet time and reading the Bible and praying, it's like foreign to you. And you hear people talk about it, and to you, it's like, I don't get it. Well, for you, we brought a resource. It's called Solo. James introduced it to us. It's from the Message version of the Bible. And what this thing does, it's pretty neat, is it goes from Genesis to Revelation 1 page a day, not more. So you don't read every scripture, but you do cover the narrative, if you will, from Genesis through Revelation. But it's not just a reading. It also every day has this accompanying, like, it just kind of, Eugene Peterson did it, just this kind of direction. Like, hey, read that verse 4 more times. Ask this question. Look at this word. Think about this word. Very Lectio Divina, if you're familiar with just this kind of slow reading of Scripture guided. I don't know. We got them. We're into them for $10 a copy. If you could be a part of, if you want one, pay in, that'd be great. And if you can't, then just take one. There's those there too. My challenge to you on Christmas, I guess, is to go like, Jesus, he won despite the busyness. But let's not be fooled. He didn't win despite the busyness because he was just busy all the time. He had this pattern of recovery. And when we look at those practices that Jesus participated in to get life and power from the Father, I think paramount to those is he understood recovery. Let me pray, and we're going to actually keep singing a little bit. God, we're grateful, Lord, for the text. Grateful for your Spirit. Grateful for books and friends and conversations and all these things that you can draw upon to talk to us about when we find ourselves alone with you. So for some people, Lord, this is about kind of getting back on the quiet time horse, if you will, and for others, it's about trying something that they've never tried before. I just pray that this Christmas season and kind of New Year would spark a new passion, a new commitment to consistency in these regards. That you get the solo in the hands of people who that'd be useful. Or even for students and kids, God, that maybe for the first time they would discover the value of just alone time with you, and if not daily, weekly, and monthly. We sure love you, Lord. Thanks for Christmas. Happy birthday. Amen.